So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and sorry for the hiccup with my microphone. My name is Dr. Norma Cady, and I am a licensed psychologist who is on the board of Psychologists of Color, Inc. And so I'm really happy to be here with you all and for us to have Dr. Erica Ligons to share her wisdom with us. So just as a quick heads up about what this evening is going to look like, we'll have about an hour together, and we are hoping to hold the last 15 minutes or so for Q&A. And so feel free to use the chat. Any questions that pop up in the chat, I will be saving so that I can pose them to Dr. Ligons towards the end. And so feel free to use the chat freely, and any other discussion points that would be helpful to use the chat for as well. But I will go ahead and introduce Dr. Ligons, and then we will jump in. So Dr. Erica Ligons is a licensed clinical psychologist with more than 7 years of experience who owns and operates her own solo private practice. She has experience treating adults, children, adolescents, and families from diverse backgrounds. Dr. Ligons speaks Spanish fluently and is able to provide therapy services in Spanish for those who prefer a bilingual therapist. Dr. Ligons specializes in working with adults and children with complex trauma, anxiety, depression, attention deficit disorder, school and behavioral concerns, relationship challenges, and life transitions. Dr. Ligons is also trained in prolonged exposure therapy for PTSD, psychodrama, and sociometry, and evidence-based parenting strategies. She is also passionate about helping future psychologists to launch their careers successfully. She enjoys supervising new psychologists and has built a successful EPPP coaching business. So with that, a big welcome to Dr. Ligons, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I've been counting down all day because I'm so happy every time I get the opportunity to be able to talk directly to people who are working toward trying to pass the EPPP. So I'm going to share my screen with you and get a little PowerPoint presentation going. You're going to notice that I'm going to go pretty fast for the first half of it, but don't worry, you will be getting a copy of this presentation, so it's all good. And then we're going to spend the time really talking about the nitty-gritty of what can hold people up from passing the exam and how to sort of set yourself up for success or get yourself back on track if you've had some challenges previously with trying to pass the test. So let me go ahead and set that up. Okay, can everyone see the slideshow? Good? Yay, that worked. Wonderful. Okay, so first of all, there I am, and I want to share with you a little bit of my story so you kind of know like where I'm coming from and why I'm so passionate about this. So I passed the EPPP on the first try with a score of 659, despite having test anxiety and a diagnosis of ADHD, and also as a person of color. That is not common to score that kind of score with someone who has the kind of challenges that I have. However, my road to EPPP success was filled with challenges. I tried multiple times to study, but was unable to gain traction until I created my study plan called the Snowball Method. This method is a part of my overall EPPP prep system known as the Master Plan Self-Guided EPPP Coaching Program. So I always like to tell people my story because I'm not a genius. I'm not some kind of test-taking prodigy or something like that. Tests, especially standardized tests, have always been challenging for me. And so I want you to know a little bit about where I'm coming from and the fact that I truly believe that if I can do this, anyone else can. So let's talk about what the EPPP is. First of all, the EPPP stands for Examination for Professional Practice in Psychology. It features 225 multiple choice questions that are knowledge-based. So it's all about facts and applying the facts that you know to different kinds of situations, and also you have to know all the historical stuff about our field. And 50 of those questions are experimental and will not affect your score, but you don't know which questions are which when you're taking it. It takes approximately 4 hours and 15 minutes to take the exam if you don't have any type of accommodations that is allowing you for extra time. And there is a little countdown clock that's featured in the corner of the screen, which shows you how much time you have left. I always want to share that with people because I've talked to so many people who didn't know that going in, and it kind of freaked them out when they got in there and they saw that countdown clock showing, you know, the time slipping away. So I always want to make sure that people know that going in. Now, to kind of help yourself to be able to remember things, you do get like this large legal-sized whiteboard, white paper thing that you're able to write some notes on. Of course, you can't bring anything into the exam, but you are able to write that down. Any quick things that you want to remember or reference, you can write that stuff out before you start the test. In order to pass the exam, you need a score of 500. If you are at the doctoral level. For master's level clinicians, the score typically tends to be a little bit lower, but it depends on the state or territory where you live. But if you are at the doctoral level, you absolutely need a 500 in order to be able to pass the exam. Now, this is something that I didn't know until I started coaching. If you get one piece of paper, then that means you have passed the exam and your score should say 500 or more. But if you unfortunately were to receive two pieces of paper, then that means unfortunately that you have had a failed attempt at the exam. And on the piece of paper, even when you pass the exam and it says 500 or more, it will say something on there like, this is not verified, or this is not your actual score. It will say something like that. And the reason for that is because Pearson actually cannot tell you whether or not you've passed the test. That is for your state board to then inform you a few days later that you have indeed passed the test. So please don't be alarmed when you see that. That's just the disclaimer that they have to give. Now, there are 4 different versions of the test floating around at any given time. And you're able to take the test up to 4 times per year. It's really important that you don't get hung up on what version of the test you're going to get, or feel like it's only possible to pass the test if you get a certain version. This is an area where a lot of times people's anxiety really can get fixated on this, like, which version of the test am I going to get? I want you to know that if you walk into this test prepared, you can pass any version that they throw at you. So please don't get hung up on these beliefs that you can only pass if you get a certain one. Even though the versions of the test do vary in difficulty, they also weigh the scoring of the test differently as well. So if you get an easier version of the test, you have to actually get a few more questions correct in order to pass it. Versus if you get a version of the test that's more difficult, you don't have to get as many questions right. But everything is weighed out and balanced equally, again, so everyone has a fair shot of passing, no matter which version they get. Now, before I go on, can I get a little read of the room? Let me see. Can people put in the chat if you're new to this whole EPPP thing? Oh, good. So we got a few people. So I'm so glad that you're here so that you can hear this information. And for those who have been through this more than once, I got tons of good information for you coming. Okay. All right, perfect. So let's keep moving along. All right. So the EPPP2 is a real thing that's been out there kind of lurking in the shadows for a long time. They're like, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? The EPPP is happening. It is a multiple choice test as well, just like the part one, but it's a little bit different in that this is a skills-based test. It's all about real life situations and trying to figure out if you can apply knowledge to real life things going on. So you're going to see things like vignettes and other types of multiple choice situations where sometimes you actually can pick up to 2 answers, which is interesting. I've never heard of a test allowing you to pick more than 1 answer, but you can. Also, some of the questions are matching based, so it's a really different kind of exam, and it's about, I think, 175 questions. Right now, these are the states and territories that require this, but it is growing. By 2026, every state and territory will require the EPPP2. This is causing a lot of uproar because it's making the test more expensive. It's going to almost double the cost, not quite, but almost. And obviously, it means another layer, another obstacle that you have to jump over to get to licensure. So there's a lot of feelings about that going on in the field, but they honestly just really don't care, and they're making it a requirement. So there's really nothing we can do. We just have to figure out how to pass it. And this one is interesting in that I actually contacted ASPPB myself to be like, how do you study for this thing? How do I coach people? And it really is one of those things where you can't really study for it. That's literally what they told me. It's not like the first part where they give you all these books and these things that you have to learn. It really is an assessment of your ability to read real life situations. So it's not something that you can technically prepare for, which in a way might be a little bit of relief because part one requires so much preparation. So it's kind of nice that you don't have to prep for this one, but at the same time, I understand that this could cause some anxiety. But hopefully, you might be living in one of the states where it's not going to be implemented till the last minute, and maybe you can slide in there and get licensed first. All right, so let's keep going and talking about what's on the EPPP1. So first of all, the content on this exam is largely based off of stuff you've seen in the past, mostly undergrad. So a lot of people are not prepared for that when they're starting to study. They think it's like more current stuff, but it's not. It's stuff you haven't seen probably in some years. So you have to give yourself a lot of grace in that this information is kind of rusty. You haven't seen it in a long time. Also, in the different study prep companies, there are like 3-4 big companies out there known as like ATBS, PrepJet, Psych Prep, Taylor Method, and Academic Review. So I guess that's 5 companies that sell the testing materials, like practice test materials, and all of the content that you need to study. And the companies tend to divide up the domains or the content areas in about 11 different ones. 6 of them, known as the Big 6, are the ones that the actual EPPP emphasizes the most. You can expect anywhere from like, I want to say like 22, 23 to like 30 questions on each one of those in that category. And then of the smaller topics, you can expect anywhere from like, I would say about 8 to 12 questions, with the exception of learning and memory. That one you might get more like 12 to 14, 12 to 15, something like that. It's a little bit bigger than the other smaller topics, but it's not as many as the Big 6. Now, if you unfortunately have a failed attempt at the EPPP, then on that second sheet of paper, you would get this bar graph thing that shows you where your strengths are and where your areas of growth are so that you can know what you need to improve. So this is taken from someone who I worked with early on in my coaching career, who is now living their best life. They're fully licensed, they own their own practice, they're doing great. But if you look at this, you'll see everything's divided into 8 categories. So the way that the test companies divide up the content is a little bit different than the way the test divides it up. So there's 3 domains that you saw on the previous slide that are not listed here, which include organizational psych, test construction, and psych assessment. Those testing items are mixed in with these different categories. So they're in there. It's just not sparsed out in the same way as the way the test companies do. But trust me, the content is in there. And if you hear people saying things, and if you have found yourself saying things like, when I took the test, it felt like it was all stats, or I didn't see any questions about IO or any questions about this, it's not true. Each one of those content areas is represented on the test. And as you can see, there's a score correlated to it. All right, let's keep going on and talking about the application process. So again, for those who have been through this before, some of this feels like review, but we will definitely get to the juicy stuff very soon. So first of all, if you go on to the ASP, I always get these letters mixed up, ASPPB website, which stands for the Association of State and Provincial Psychological Boards, that's where you will find all the information you need to know about the EPPP. And they have a really helpful handbook that you need to read in its entirety. So much good information in there telling you exactly how to go about applying for the test, how it works. And they even have links in there to all the different state boards so that you can start the application process. So after you've read that handbook thoroughly, you need to decide where you're going to pursue licensure. And keep in mind, you don't have to take the test in the same exact place where you are sitting for the exam. So let's say you're doing your postdoc in Colorado, but you're originally from New York and you want to move back home to New York to start your life and start your practice. You can apply to New York State, get permission from them, and physically sit down and take the exam in Colorado. Okay, I didn't know that at first. Because no one tells you anything, which is why we're doing this webinar today, to make sure you know how all this works. So you need to submit your application to the board to get permission. And if you need accommodations for additional time, because perhaps you have a learning disability or you have ADHD, test anxiety, what have you, you should apply for accommodations at the time that you are getting permission to take the exam. And give yourself a few weeks to get these documentation together. You have to get transcripts, you have to get people to sign stuff from your postdoc if your state requires it, or from internship. You definitely have to have paperwork showing that you completed that. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it. It's easy to do, but it does require kind of hounding people, tracking people down, getting people to sign stuff. So you need to definitely leave ample time. And if you are getting accommodations, you might need to see your provider, get them to provide some documentation. So you just need to leave ample time for this. And then once you do submit your application to the board, it can take weeks, sometimes months. If you happen to be from a state like California, I'm hearing things like 3 to 6 months. Some of the state boards are so disorganized, it's kind of a mess. So you need to know ahead of time what these time frames are so that you can plan accordingly. Then once you've got permission from your state to sit for the exam, you'll be able to book the test with Pearson using the Certamy online portal thing. In order to be able to book test dates, you actually have to pay first. I say you have to pay to play. And then once you pay with them, you get up to 12 months to take the exam. However, your state also gives you a deadline for how long you can take the exam. And those two dates are not going to be the same date. You might get permission to take the exam, start studying, and then a few months later, you pay to take the test. So obviously your state deadline is going to come up sooner than the certainty deadline, and you have to keep all that straight. So organization is really important during this process. And state deadline trumps certainty deadline. So we have to talk about bias. We know the EPPP pass rates amongst people of color are not the same. And it's really disheartening to see numbers like this. I wish it wasn't like this. It's very hard to see that every step of the way when people of color are trying to build their life and their career, that there's obstacles. And this table does not reflect the number of people who never take the exam, who graduate and maybe out of fear of taking the exam or feeling inadequate to do so, perhaps as a person of color feeling like they can't pass, who avoid doing so. Or this also doesn't show the number of people, like how many times it takes them to pass the exam, right? So like that 39% of African Americans that don't pass the first time, how many times are they trying until they get it? And what's the impact on their life during that process? There's not enough research out here. I can tell you as a coach, it's really hurting people's lives and financially and all sorts of different ways. But there's not a lot of, real research being done about this, which is very sad. But before we continue, I want to say, even though these numbers look bad, I want you to know that as a person of color, you can pass this exam. After coaching enough people at this point who largely are people of color, I have found that even with the test being the way that it is, that environmental factors are really accounting for a lot more of why people of color are having trouble passing the exam than the actual exam itself. And the reason why I know this is because, like I said, most of the people I coach are people of color. And when we fix other factors, they go take the same bias test that they've taken before, this EPPP, and they're able to then pass it, even still being a person of color and the test still being exactly how it is. I hope that makes sense. I just want to inspire everyone and give you hope that you can do this. You really, really, really can. Okay, so why is studying for this test so hard? First of all, the best answer is the right answer. So this test is written weird, and a lot of times you're going to see more than one question that could be correct. Questions are often written in convoluted and excessively wordy ways. It covers, like I said, material either that you haven't seen in a long time, but it also asks about a lot of stuff you've never heard of. I don't know where they get half the questions, because you're going to take this exam and see that most of it, you're going to be like, none of this is in my study materials. Not none of the tests, but like, for me, I felt like a half to 2/3 of it did not directly ask about things that I had studied. Furthermore, cognitive flexibility is really important. So for example, I remember a question where the answer was cognitive schema, but it was written as mental framework. So it doesn't use the same terminology that you're used to. Not to mention, as a result of all of these things, while you're taking it, most of the time people feel like they're guessing. They're getting it down to 2 answers for most of the tests. They don't feel super confident, and sometimes even feel like they're failing while they're taking it, which is really difficult. So this is why it's so hard to actually sit and take the exam. So then how do we overcome this thing, right? Like, if there's all these barriers against us, especially as people of color, and I've just confirmed for you that the test is hard, it is weird, how do we actually do this? So there's 3 areas where you need to be strong. Number 1, content knowledge. I know I just said half the stuff that you study isn't going to be directly asked about on the test, but that doesn't mean that the content knowledge still isn't helping you. It's helping you to narrow down answers and get to the right one or the best answer. So you still have to know this stuff, even if they don't ask about a lot of it. Next, you have to have strong stress management techniques. This was something that I worked really hard on during my journey. I started off being physically ill a lot of the time from my anxiety about this process, feeling totally doubtful, just crying a lot. I used to have horrible crying spells about this test. And I really had to learn how to overcome that. So stress management is key. And test taking skills. So you got to be able to read questions carefully and understand what it's asking for and be able to decipher and get to the right one. But they say triangles is like the strongest shape, and because each part is really leaning on each other, and that's the case here. You have to have all three of these things in order to be able to pass this exam. So let's talk about what it takes to prepare. You need to think about preparing for the EPPP like preparing for a marathon. It's not something that happens overnight. It takes a lot of dedication and a lot of discipline. In fact, you need about 15 to 20 hours a week and about 3 to 4 months, but hopefully no more than 6. Some people like to go a little slower, and that's okay. But ideally, you don't want to be studying more than about 6 months, because if you study for too long, it's so easy to lose focus. In terms of the test prep companies, each one has their pros and cons, so you just have to pick the one that you feel is best for you. And that's one of the things that I give people in my coaching program. There's a workbook that comes along with it, and I have a table in there which really spells out some of the pros and cons of each, so it can help you think through which one will be best for you. But keep in mind, you can pass and fail with any of them, because again, it all comes down to how well you use the materials and your mindset. So don't think that there's one program that is the secret magic answer. It's all about how you show up and how you use it. Also, will your school provide materials? Thankfully, my school did. And if your school doesn't, everyone in your graduating class needs to raise hell to your school, and they need to start paying for this, especially for students of color who do not a lot of times have generational wealth. A lot of times they're still first generation to go to college. Nobody has $1,000 just laying around for these study materials. I certainly didn't. And thankfully, my school was a part of the tuition, so I didn't have to worry about paying for it. So you need to find out if your school is paying for this stuff, and if they're not, raise hell, because this is ridiculous. Schools need to be doing a better job of preparing us to take this exam. So, and if they don't want to listen to you, tell anybody who's a year behind you at your program, tell them to raise hell too, because what is it, like the squeaky wheel gets the oil? So we need to drum up commotion here to get them to listen. Okay, so why prepping? I talked about why taking the exam is hard, but let's talk about why actually studying and prepping for it can be hard. So it's an independent process, which requires a lot of discipline. Also, you're balancing other things in your life. You might have children, you might have a partner, a mortgage, all sorts of different stuff people are balancing after they graduate. And so it can be hard to hold all the balls in the air. Not to mention you're just tired, right? Like grad school is such a grind. I joke to people that I'm still recovering. I mean, I've been out now almost double the amount of time I was in, and I still feel like I'm recovering from that time. That it's no joke to go through a program and get an advanced degree. So you are tired to a level to your bones. So that's why another reason why this is so hard. And again, you're by yourself. It's a solo man thing. And, a lot of times there's just really not a lot of support. So why some people struggle to pass? So first of all, there's some study mistakes that people make. In my audio program, I go over about 15 different mistakes that people make while they are studying. and one of which is under preparation. People do not have consistent study hours. They're not studying for long enough time, or when they sit down to study, they're unproductive, they're on their phone, they're unfocused. So they just walk away, even if they put in the time, it wasn't fruitful, it wasn't effective. And the way people study, a lot of times people are reading and listening to audios, and that's it. They're not really studying in a way that breaks down the content for them to learn it over time. So people are just relying way too much on passive study methods. And they're not studying the topics enough. So they might spend too much time on certain topics and not enough time on others. And so they're just not getting well-rounded content knowledge. And this is something that people really struggle. My new coaching clients, particularly those who have taken the tests before, they really struggle with the idea that they didn't know the content. And usually it's not until they've worked with me and they're about to take the test again after studying in a completely different way, then they start to realize, oh, wow, I didn't really know that content. But it's not until you get to the other side that you realize that you didn't know it before. I hope that makes sense. But it's really important that we're studying in active ways. And another thing that people do is they misuse practice tests. They take them over and over and over again, or they avoid them like the plague. But most people tend to take them too many times, which elevates their score and gives them a false sense of readiness, when in reality, it's practice effects. So that's another thing that really gets in the way for people. And a lot of times too, people are testing when they're not ready. They're just going through and sticking with the date anyway, even if they're not ready, because they just want it to be over with. And so they're kind of going into the test on a hope and a prayer that something will work out when they're not really ready. Now, in addition to these study mistakes that people make, there also are problems with underlying things that are going on with people, a lot of times unconsciously, that are coming up for people. So first, ego. We all have an ego. We all have a sense of pride. This is a normal part of our sense of self. But it can be a huge blow to our ego when we find ourselves struggling to study if school has always been something you've excelled at. And I have seen that people sometimes really have a hard time overcoming that bruise that they feel to their ego when they unfortunately have failed the test, especially when they see other people who maybe they feel strongly that they're just as competent, if not more competent, and they see them kind of passing the test and they're not. It can really, really, really hurt one's ego, you know? So we have to do some work around that to release some of those feelings. Also, if you've got untreated anxiety and you're not getting the proper therapy or medication or support that you need to manage your anxiety, that is also another major problem. It can really wreak havoc during your whole study approach and, of course, on test day. And lastly, work-life balance. A lot of people of color in particular tend to overwork. I know growing up, I always heard, if you want to make it in this world as a person of color, you have to work twice as hard. And so what ends up happening is people are working twice as hard. So then they have no brain cells left at the end of the day to study for the EPPP. And so they find themselves failing the exam or just prolonging it because they're too stressed and they're too overwhelmed. So in my audio program, I go way in depth with providing a lot more information about why people are struggling to pass. Just wanted to give you a sample today, but there's so much more to talk about with this. So the vicious cycle of failing and avoiding the test. So I wanted to talk about this because it's just happens so frequently where people fall into a pattern of failing the exam and they're not really sure why this is happening. They're, again, in this little bubble by themselves trying to figure it out, and they don't know why it's happening. So a lot of times there's a perfect storm of factors: lack of support, lack of resources, negative feelings about the test, ineffective study habits, life stress, all of that is coming together and will cause a person to either fail or avoid the test. Okay. Then, if we're not careful and we don't get support, that failed attempt then leads to more negative beliefs about the test, more negative beliefs about themselves, and tons of negative feelings, more anxiety, more shame, more despair, anger, all of that. Meanwhile, as all of that is mounting, there's more pressure to pass because everyone else is passing around you. Jobs are on the line, financial stress that this process is causing, and not being able to make more income. And a lot of times, unfortunately, again, because people are left to their own devices and they don't have the support they need, they don't know what they're doing wrong in their studying. So they continue a lot of times with the same unhelpful study habits, which is not helping them. And they continue to spend more money on study materials. And in some cases, if they were going through a lot of personal stress, those personal stressors can still be happening, which again is negatively impacting their ability to focus and study. So then all of this leads to continued lack of content mastery, inadequate test taking skills, poor emotional regulation, and unfortunately, overall lack of readiness, which then leads them to either continue to avoid the test or to have another failed attempt. And what breaks my heart the most is that so often, by the time people find out about me, they've gone through this cycle several times and thousands of dollars have been spent and they're in a really, really, really hard place. So I wanted to share that with you so either you can avoid it, or if you're looking at this and you're realizing, oh my gosh, I think that's what's happening with me, we can talk about how to get you out of it. Because if you don't, here's what can happen in life. You're not going to be able to do the work you want to do. Dissatisfaction with the work you're doing because you feel like you're stuck, you feel like you've outgrown it, but you can't get other jobs. Financial strain because you're not able to make your full income. Some cases, people have lost jobs, unfortunately. Some, unfortunately, have lost their homes because of the financial strain, which is really unfortunate. This also can take a toll on your relationships and your family. Of course, it can impact how you feel about yourself. Remember, the ego can get really impacted, especially after multiple failed attempts. And for some people, it really can lead to depression, anxiety, or can make those issues worse. So remember, mindset is everything. If you want to pass this test, 80% of it is being positive, being in a good headspace, and making sure that your personal life stress is manageable. Of course, we can never make everything perfect. Life is always going to be throwing us challenges, but you need to be careful about trying to study when you're going through major life transitions or a lot of personal trauma, tragedy, or turmoil, because that really makes it almost impossible to pass the exam when you're trying to make something happen under such conditions. And the other 20% of passing is really about the plan and the system. And that's where I come in. I teach you how to actually study for the exam and how to get everything in order. So personal therapy, I tell my coaching clients, is a must because this process is difficult, it's challenging. You will be confronted with all of your greatest strengths and your areas of growth as you're going through this. So the more you have personal space to be able to vent and get support around this, the better. All right, so I'm going to try to get through these last couple and then we'll get to questions. So your support system is everything. They can be your greatest asset or your liability. Especially for people of color, we tend to come from pretty tight-knit communities, which again, can be so helpful when they're helpful, but also can really cause a lot of challenges. And so it's really important that you get them on board. Start prepping them early. Send your loved ones, friends, and children to my website, the Friends and Family page. You will see audio recordings that they can listen to that gives them tips on how they can support you, such as leaving you alone during study time or not pressuring you to come to every family event while you're studying because you need to focus on the test. There's even a place for them to purchase gift cards, to send you meals, groceries, just to help you during this process, because working full time and studying is very time consuming. And I also encourage them, to help you with house chores if they can, or if you have children, if they can help with babysitting. Any way your village can rally around you and support you, the more they can do that, the better. So please send them to my website. And of course, we need to have conversations about boundaries and temporary rules that we're going to have in place so that you have the time and energy to really focus on studying and your loved ones won't be distracting you away from that. So you need to be careful to be aware of the urban legends and all the negativity out there. If you talk to people about the EPPP and you walk away from the conversation feeling more stressed and anxious than you did before, probably is not helpful for you and you need to stay away from that. About 12 months out, you need to find out if your school is covering the materials, start getting your finances in order. Here's an example of some of the testing costs. So as you can see, this is expensive. I mean, it's a lot of money. So you need to be thinking about your plan of how you're going to get your finances ready for this and exhausting any resources that you can find. Either your school can maybe pay for stuff, your employer sometimes will even pay for testing materials, coaching services. I have a page on my website. It's called Become a Partner. That's where you should be sending your supervisor. There's tips and strategies in there on how they can support you. And there's even some testimonials that I'll be putting up in the next week from other supervisors who have sent their clients to me and they've actually paid, not their clients, their supervisees, and they've actually paid for coaching services with me, and you hear about their experience as supervisors and how much it helps their program when they actually support their staff to pass this test. So send your supervisor there so they can make it a part of just the process, that they pay for testing materials or they pay for, I mean, you go to other fields, this is common. You need to get certified in something, the job pays for it. I mean, this is like the norm in every other field, and it should be for us too. Last but not least, about 6 months out, I want you to decide to be thinking, where you're going to get licensed, making sure you're contacting the boards to find out timeframes of how long things take, and what the requirements are for getting accommodations if you need them, and start prepping your support system. So that's it. I can stop sharing and we can turn to questions.
Hey, thank you so much for all of that information. A couple questions have come in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read the first one. Karina asked, what are a few of the tips you give your students when they have failed multiple times, especially as it relates to self-esteem?
Yes. First of all, I want you to know that, again, I truly believe that if I can do this, anyone can. I am not special. I am not extra smart. You are so capable. Each and every one of you on here is so capable of passing this test. Please know that this has nothing to do with your capabilities as a human being. We have been done, and I'm about to get on my soapbox right now. We have been done a grave disservice by our field, especially as people of color, just throwing people out after graduation, fending for themselves, having to pay all this money, no guidance, literally all the information that I gave you in this presentation. I heard almost none of this when I did this years ago. That is a travesty, and that's why people are failing. It's not that you're not capable, you haven't been supported enough. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's those are such important points, Erica. I think, I agree, as somebody that is the first person in my family who got a doctorate. Parents are immigrants from the Middle East. There's so much that I think, had to learn on our own through this process. And I love that you suggested that, information about the financial aspects, and how, that is a barrier in and of itself, and to advocate for, or with your programs, to try to get that paid for and covered, because that's so important.
We need to start a revolution. We need to hit the streets and protest. I'm telling you, I'm fired up.
Yep, absolutely. It's like asking the field to remove some of these barriers that they've put in place for, certain populations to get licensed. So
yes, and can I say one more quick thing? The need out here for licensed clinicians of color. Whenever I put my Psychology Today page or whatever, whenever I need a new client, I can only have it up for a few days because I get inundated by so many people. The need is so high. When we win as clinicians of color, the world wins, because we can go out there and provide the kind of treatment that people need and give people a safe haven. So it not only benefits us as individuals, but our field and society as a whole. So just wanted to add that part.
Absolutely. Let me ask the next question. I don't want to mispronounce the name. Orinaya asks, I'm a passive learner, listening and reading. I also know that I also like to actively engage with material conversation. What are some ways you recommend to actively engage with study materials?
Absolutely. So in my audio program, I have a whole recording called Effective Study Strategies, but I'll give you a tip or two now. First of all, I read every single page in those books. So trust and believe, I believe in reading the content. You need to take really detailed yet concise notes. Very important. It helps you to digest the material. And if you're going to listen to recordings, that's fine. Try to make it as active as possible. Pause it. Rephrase what you just heard. Think of creative ways to remember it. Don't just sit there and let it wash over you. You need to actively engage with it as if you're back in the classroom.
Thank you. And I think along similar lines related to active study methods, Dr. Anani asked, can you give examples of the active study methods or what the snowball method is that you used?
Yeah, so the snowball method, well, that recording is almost an hour long, so I can't explain the whole thing. But what I will say is that it's highly structured. It involves laying out the content in a specific way that is lined up with your personal strengths, as well as what's most emphasized on the test. And I have you attack each domain in a really systematic way and reviewing the content repeatedly so you learn it over time. So it is a really, like I said, methodical way of doing it. Most people, when I do my intake assessments with new coaching clients, and I really sit with them and I get in their, I call it their EPPP business. I ask them tons of questions about how they study, like get into the nitty gritty. And so often people don't have a plan. They're kind of just flying by the seat of their pants, going from here to there to everywhere. And this is not like that. It's highly structured.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I have another question. This person asked, from someone who has taken it so many times, how can I get over the fact that I struggled with comprehending the questions when I don't have any anxiety issues?
Got it. So what I would say about that is I do want to again validate that the questions are pretty dumb. They're written in really weird ways. What I will say is you need to develop a system of how you read the questions. And again, I go over that a lot with my coaching clients. Like, you need to become kind of a robot, a machine, and approaching the questions in a really systematic way. And content knowledge really, really, really helps you to better understand questions. as well as developing more cognitive flexibility. Because what happens for a lot of people is they read the question and sometimes they might know the answer or they have an idea. Then they look at the answers and they don't see anything in the answers that looks like surface levels, looks like the answer. And then they kind of freak out and start spiraling and they think they don't understand the question. And that's not for a lot of people what's going on. You do understand more than you think you do. It's just the questions are written in weird ways. So when you don't see the answer appearing to be there, it sends people on a loop. That makes sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important just to hit on that fact. I think one thing you keep kind of repeating is giving yourself the grace and the opportunity to sit with the questions a little bit, because they are tricky. They might not use the same language that we might have learned this material in. And so being able to, it's almost like another thing you have to kind of practice or study is like how to be more flexible in the moment.
And breathe.
Mhm.
Stay calm.
Absolutely. And okay, we have a few minutes and there's more questions coming in. So Liz says, I graduated a while ago. I took the test after work pressure, failed and have been putting it off. Do you think there's a lost opportunity since years have gone by? I know this sounds silly, but I have to wonder, although I feel like I know the material, if I decide to study again, this would be my last time.
It's never too late. As long as you've got air in your lungs, that heart is still beating, you can do this. I have worked with people. Go onto my website under the testimonials. In this past year, I've started doing testimonials with a few of my people that passed. Some are a little camera shy, but others don't mind telling their story. I have someone on there, she failed the test 15 times before she passed. 15. Okay, she never gave up. It was over the course of like, I think 6 or 7 years. I've had people come to me, they graduated years ago, went a different path. It's been 10 years since they've opened up a book and they're back in it. It's never too late. I would love to help you get back in the game so you can put all this behind you.
Thank you. Okay, we have one more question in the chat and we have Erica with her hand up. Erica, do you want to ask your question real quick?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for doing this. As a person of color, I'm going on my 3rd year, and I'm in a cohort where there's just a handful of people of color, and in some ways it just feels very I don't know, like scary too. But like you were saying, I'm in community mental health right now in the clinic, and there is a need for clinicians of color, and I'm so swamped like with clients wanting to see me and just like showing up with that representation. So question is, and I just really appreciate your transparency, because I myself suffer from performance anxiety and I am diagnosed with ADHD. So I know you mentioned to study 3 to 4 months, but no more than 6 months. But knowing myself, I do read like a little slower. So what is your suggestion for like when should I start? Like I was kind of thinking my 4th year, but I don't know if my question makes a lot of sense.
So again, just because you're working with certain challenges doesn't mean you can't do this. So just remember, you can do this. That's number one. And number two, I really don't think that people should be trying to do this while they're balancing the craziness of school. It's insane. It's just too much. You really need to, like, this really has to be a priority. So I just get through your program, finish that, then worry about this after. And I would say, even with someone who had the very same challenges, I did this in about 4 months. So I think that 6-month range is still perfect for someone, even if they're dealing with test anxiety or ADHD.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you.
And I just want to plug, as a psychologist working in disability services and higher ed, do not hesitate to request accommodations if you need it. And if you maybe haven't been diagnosed, but feel like you might have a learning disability or ADHD or anxiety that's impacting your performance, go and get the assessment done that will help you to be able to get accommodations. Sorry. I'm going to ask the one last question. I know we're going to run out of time, but Samar's asking, I would like to say that I agree with you when you said that the test has hardly anything to do with the material. In all honesty, I know the material pretty well, and I've been studying since July, August 2022. How will one ever pass if the test is hardly on the material? Any tips on what I should shift my focus on?
Yes. So first of all, we have to get to a place of radical acceptance that the test is what it is, and that people can still pass. The version of the test that I took is no different than the one you all are going to take in terms of how weird it is. So remember, when you know the content very well, you've mastered it, it helps you to be able to decipher and weed out answers, even when you're confronted with content that's crazy. You've never heard of it. It's weird. You don't know where they got it from. So please don't think that all the studying you're doing is in vain. It's not. It's helping you, even if it doesn't feel like it is.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Ligons. I really hope, and I know that this would have been really helpful for me when I was preparing for the EPPP. So I hope you all have gotten some nuggets of wisdom through this process, and please don't hesitate to reach out to Dr. Ligons or to connect with other folks who are part of the Psychologists of Color Inc. network to provide support. I'm going to close this out real quick with just yes, go ahead.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just put a coupon code in the chat for the master plan. Go on my website, guys, crushtheePPP.com. Get on my mailing list. If you're not quite ready to start studying, or you just got to get some ducks in a row. And if you are currently studying, please hit me up for an intake appointment. Let me hear what you've been doing. Let's get you on the right track and get you moving forward. But yes, I just wanted to mention that.
Thanks. And it looks like it did not show up in the chat, the coupon code. If you want to stick it in there again, make sure it's going to everyone.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes, I will do that right now.
Great. And I just want to make a quick mention about Psychologists of Color Inc. So this nonprofit that is putting on this event tonight, the mission of POC is to increase the racial and ethnic diversity of the psychologist workforce by supporting future and current psychologists of color. And central to this mission is helping psychologists of color to pass the EPPP, of course. And so one of the Psychologists of Color Inc. Core support programs is also an EPPP coaching circle. It's an innovative resource hub and support group helping to equip psychologists with the tools, skills, and support needed to prepare for and pass the licensing exam. So check out our website for information about that as well. It's a different type of resource than the coaching that Dr. Ligons is talking about, but especially if you're in a situation like some of you have talked about where you've taken it before and you're trying to find some new strategies to help, definitely check out all of the resources that you can and see what works for you. Also, just keep your eye out on the Psychologists of Color Inc. website. We are going to have some great workshops coming up in upcoming months and additional initiatives that we're launching. So follow the website, and you can also find other ways there to get involved with POC, volunteering. If you want, maybe you're interested in being on the board. There's a bunch of different ways that you can get involved. So please check out our website and continue to attend our events and spread the word as well. But thank you all for being here, and I hope you have a great rest of your night.